Have you ever been in a place that you just didn't feel like you belonged? I know the answer to that. Everybody's been at that place, you know. Maybe it's work. You just don't connect with anybody and you don't feel like you belong there. Maybe it's in your family. You go to your extended family situation, or maybe you've got multiple siblings and all the siblings are the same and you're the weird one and you just don't feel like you belong there. Maybe it's church. Maybe it's here. Maybe it's at a previous church that you like it and you show up, but you just don't feel like you belong. We moved to Fayetteville in 2007 to start Pathway Baptist Church in Fayetteville. And we gave up a lot for that church. We worked hard. We sacrificed. I spent 5 years earning a part-time salary for more than full-time work the entire time. We gave up a ton for that church and loved that church. And we were an integral part of everything that happened. And then God called us to go somewhere else. And we left. And then we come back to visit and we're like, oh, what happened? This doesn't feel right anymore. And it's frustrating because something you love so much, when you don't have a place there anymore, it's different. It's like it should all be the same. In my mind, it's all the same, but I go back and I should know everybody, but I don't. And I should know what happens and what's going on, but I don't. And it goes from being a place that I belonged and loved to a place that I really can't even go back and visit because I don't belong. When you don't belong, it's hard to love. Maybe you went back to high school and you graduated high school and you're like, I'm going to go back and see those couple of teachers I really liked. You're going to check things out and you go back in and you realize how weird it is to go back. Maybe you've been in that situation. But the thing that we look at as we start to look at belonging, we start to look at this and realize how much that matters to us. How much belonging matters to us when it comes to our commitment to things, how much it matters when it comes to our love for the people involved in that. And also when we don't feel like we belong, we also start to build up this resentment because we want to belong and we just don't feel like we do. We've been talking for the past few weeks, and what we're doing this year, this challenge is to make this year an amateur year. And if you've not been here or if you've slept since the last time I said all these things, I want to remind you that we're looking at what an amateur really is. Not a low quality, not unpaid, but an amateur is someone who does what they do because they love what they do. An Olympic athlete is an amateur. They may get paid to be on the Wheaties box, but they're doing gymnastics for free. That's how this works. And they do it because they love it. The man that stays up all night long or gets up at 2 o'clock in the morning and starts smoking that brisket for his family doesn't do it because he gets paid. It costs him to do it, but he does it for love. And we want to look at amateurs this year, and I just want to encourage you to become an amateur in everything. In this church, I want you to be an amateur, that you're someone who does what you do because you love what you do. That you develop a love for these people and for this work and for this church. That in your families, that you are amateurs, that you're motivated by love. That in your workplace, even though you may not like Walmart all that much, that you're motivated by love for the people that you work with and the people that you are working to provide for. Because when you're an amateur, when you do things because of love and not because of obligation or guilt, it's different. We looked at what Jesus had to say about this. We looked at Revelation chapter 2, not the part of Revelation that you're thinking about, but the part that becomes before all that, Revelation chapter 2, where Jesus talks to the churches, the 7 churches there in Turkey that he writes to, or that he sends a message to and John writes to. And he says to the first church there that he talks to, the church at Ephesus, and he says, you are doing everything right. Your doctrine is right. You're making sure that you're holding on to what the truth is about things. You're working hard. You're getting the mission of Jesus done. You're doing it all right. But I have this one problem with you. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. You started with a motive of love, and now you have a different motive, whether it's guilt or obligation. Whatever it is, you're not working out of love. And if you don't find that love that you had at the first, if you don't go back to your earlier motive of doing things, there will be consequences. Consequences to you as a church, consequences to you as individuals. So we look at that and said, Jesus said, like, this idea of being an amateur in this is not just a thing that Ben cooked up because he liked the graphic on it. This is not just one of those things, but Jesus tells us that we as a church, our job is to act out of love. to serve Jesus. That even as important as doctrinal purity or theological perfectitude is, as important as those things are, your motive of love is more important. And if we don't have that, there will be consequences for us. Then we looked at how to develop that, because you tell me all day long, hey, you should love. Like, which switch do I flip to do that? Like, how do I love? How do I make myself love something that I don't love? And then we looked at what Jesus had to say and realized that the commands given to us when it comes to how we function in the church, they're not directly there to get us to love, but they produce love within us. Last week we looked at the command that we're supposed to gather together as brothers and sisters to encourage each one another, to stir one another up, to love and good works, to encourage one another. That our function as a church is not just to show up and listen. It's not about receiving a sermon every week, but it's about gathering together to stir one another up. And if we're not doing that, then we're not functioning as a church. But if we will do that, the church becomes an engine for encouragement, for good actions, for good works, for the things we're supposed to do, an engine for obedience, but it also produces love in us, because when we do that, we find our people. And we find our people, we find love. Right? If you have your people that you love, that take care of you and that you take care of, you can do anything in any circumstance. But the moment you lose those people, you lose your love for that situation. That was the first command we looked at. Today, the command we're going to look at comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and it addresses this question about belonging. Because if we don't feel like we belong, it's really, really hard to love. And if you come into this church and you feel like, you know what, I like this church, I enjoy the music, I enjoy the size of the church, the seats are comfortable, you like all of that, the preacher doesn't mess things up too often. If you like those things, but you don't feel like you have a place here, you're not going to develop love for this. You're just going to like it. And the moment you don't like it, you're going to move on. You're not contributing anything because you don't have a place. You're just showing up and consuming something. So we're going to look at what he had to say about that to the church at Corinth. Now, Paul is the one that writes this, and he writes to the church at Corinth. And the church at Corinth gets a bad rap because they did literally everything wrong. I mean, that's a reason to get a bad rap. But the thing about them is they were trying. They were serving God. They were trying to explore freedom in Christ. They were trying to explore grace and figure out how all that worked. And they made all the mistakes that we get to look at and say, y'all shouldn't have done that. But they did it so that we would have those commands. That's why God allowed to work out that way. And Paul is trying to address how to deal with these things at the church at Corinth. He's trying to address how to deal with their sexual sin, how to deal with their division, and how all of that functions. And he realizes that the reason that they're having all these problems is because they don't understand how the church is supposed to work. And it makes sense that they wouldn't understand how the church was supposed to work. Because think about this. Has anything like the church ever existed before? Has anything like it ever existed before? Well, you got Jews that are part of this church and they go to synagogue. Well, that's like church, right? No, not really. Because with the synagogue, the way it operated is you had officials that did all the work and you showed up for education. It really wasn't even for worship, because worship happened at the temple. But you showed up to teach your kids. You showed up to hear a sermon. You showed up to these things. And you would have some community there, but it's really just the community that you already have. It's not a church, and it doesn't function like a church. So the Jews were coming out of synagogue into a church situation that they've never been in before and thinking it functions that way, not realizing that there's actually supposed to be a whole lot more that goes along with it. The pagans, the Greeks, the Gentiles, they were having a lot more problems than that, because their idea of worship was to go to a temple, they offered a sacrifice, the priest took care of everything, and that was it. There's no education. There's no accountability. There's really not even a time of worship where you come together, but rather they would come and offer their sacrifices, and that would be it. And so Paul realizes, okay, the thing is you're not understanding what the purpose of the church is and how it's supposed to function. It's not just a place that you show up and learn like a synagogue. It's not just a place that you show up and offer your worship through professionals like the pagan temple. But this is far more something else. And he gives them this illustration that we use a lot but don't really think about. He gives them this illustration of the body of Christ. He says, you want to understand the church, this is how you understand the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in verse 14. It says, for the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? He says, what you're supposed to be is not a pagan temple where you show up and you offer your sacrifices and you worship and you do whatever the priests tell you to do. It's not a synagogue where you show up and you have a class and you learn and you go about your business until you can make it to the temple. But rather, the church is supposed to be a body that does the work that Jesus would do if Jesus were here. That we come together as a community and say, what would Jesus do? And let's go do that as a group. That's what the purpose of this is. Do we have worship services? Yes. Do we have teaching? Yes. Do we have sermons? Yes. Do we have community? Yes. But what is our job? What is the primary function? It is for us to be the body of Christ in this community. That's what we're supposed to be. And he said, you're not understanding that. You think this is about some of you showing up and being like the officials in the synagogue or the officials in the temple, where you do the work and you get the credit and everybody else just shows up to support you. And some of you think that you're just there and you're just one of these people that don't matter because you're just there and you're just supporting the people that are doing the big work. But what you're not understanding is that this is supposed to be a body that functions together. And the body does not consist of one member, but many. It's not about one job. It's not about one role. If this were a teaching organization or a worship organization, then there would be 2 or 3 jobs, right? There's the preaching, there's the teaching, put those as one job. There's the leading of worship, that's another job. And then there's somebody to count the money. That's the third job. That's all there is, if that's what this is. But he said that's not what it's supposed to be. Rather, it's supposed to be a body that does the work of Jesus. And because of that, everyone that's part of it is a part of it. Everyone that's a part of the body has a function and a role. And you can't say, I don't matter, because I'm not up on stage. I don't matter because I'm not one of the ones teaching. I don't matter because I don't give very much. I don't matter because of whatever. But rather, you recognize that if Jesus has called you here to this church, then you belong as a part of this church, and you have a purpose here in this church. No one gets to say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body. Because what would a body be that was all hands? Creepy. That's what it would be. It would be a creepy body with no function except to scare everybody. But a body that's constituted of all its parts is a body that can do the work it's intended to do. If the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. The idea that you think you don't matter doesn't contribute to whether you matter or not. Because the one that decides whether you matter or not is Jesus. And if He's decided that you are a part of the body and are part of the function of the body, then you matter here in what's going on. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? Paul is saying 2 things here. He's saying you're divided because you think there are people that matter and people that don't matter. But what I'm telling you is that you all matter. So if your attitude is the rest of you don't matter because I'm on stage and you're not, then you are wrong and need to correct yourself. Because you're hurting other people that Jesus intends to be here. Because you think, I've been here the longest, I'm the one that knows where everything is, I'm the one that gets things done, these other people are interchangeable, but I matter. You are wrong. And for those of you who say, I don't matter, and you either think that's a hall pass, that you don't have to do anything because you don't matter, or you think you're insecure about yourself because you think, I don't contribute as much as they do, so I'm either going to pull back into my shell or I'm going to stay mad at those people all the time because they matter and I don't, you're wrong. What Paul says is the way this is supposed to function is as a body that does the work of Jesus, where every piece of the body matters. Is there a piece of your body that's supposed to be there that doesn't matter? Is there? We thought for a long time the appendix had no function and people would just take it out. Like, we're already in here, let's get it out of here. But we found recently that the appendix actually plays a huge role in your gut health, in the bacteria in your stomach. We're finding out that there are things that this thing was doing that we had no idea about. And when you take it out, it actually does cause you some problems. People are like, well, the gallbladder, it really doesn't do that much. And then you take the gallbladder out because you're having some other problems. And what do you know if you don't suffer stomach problems for the rest of your life because of that? My grandfather was a bad diabetic, and he was the kind of person that didn't tell you anything was wrong. If something was wrong, he was at a low level of pain all the time because of his issues that he had, medical issues. So, just being in pain was part of his life. And he was walking around, his feet got so numb at one point that he was walking around, he took his shoe off and found his watch in his shoe. And he had no idea it was there, because that part of his body had stopped functioning. He had to have toes cut off because of diabetes and the things that went along with that. And you know what happened when you cut the small toe off, that pinky toe off? You know what happens? You have to relearn how to walk, guys. Because that pinky toe helps you balance in a way that you have no idea that it does. And we'd say, which part of my body can I cut off and be fine without? That pinky toe, that's not doing anything. And all of a sudden, you can't walk anymore. Because your body was made to function the way it did. You have 2 kidneys. You can give one of them away and be okay. But your body doesn't operate the way it's supposed to. You can cut off a hand and live, but not the way that you're supposed to. Every piece of the body is ordained by God to be there and matters. And there's not a person in this room that should be looked down on as if they don't matter, or that should look down on themselves and say that they don't matter. Everyone here matters. I'm on stage, guys. I get all the FaceTime. I get on the website. I'm on the social media. I get all the FaceTime. I am completely replaceable. Completely replaceable. God calls me somewhere else, or I get hit by a bus. One of those 2 things happen. You can have another guy in here quickly. God can raise up someone from within this church to replace me quickly. And if it's the person God has for this church will continue on in the exact same way. Although I think I'm important, I am completely and totally replaceable. I am not more important than any single person in this church that God has arranged in this church. And no one else is either, because we've been brought together. Some things might be easier to function without than others, but that doesn't mean that they're not an important part. You cut that toe off, you can still function, but not the way that you're supposed to. As it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as He chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. Now, here's the thing that Paul didn't know about when he was writing this. I assume he didn't know about it because it didn't exist yet. At this time, there weren't 14 or 15 churches in a city. There was one church in a city where there was a church. And so what he's saying to them is, you, as a group of believers, that you are there and you have a role and everybody is important. But the larger view of this, as we get to hear, is we're in a place where there are 15 or 20 other churches that you could go to in this place. As we look at all the other churches that there could be at, what we realize is something that Paul said, but maybe didn't even understand that he was saying, is that God arranges the individual bodies as He chooses. And that means that Jesus Himself has chosen a church for you. It's not about where do I like the music the best. It's not about where do I like the preaching the best. It's honestly, guys, it's not even about where are the people that I want to relate to the most. It's not about where are the people in my age group. It's where has Jesus placed me? Where does Jesus intend for me to be? I talk to young preachers, and I was the same way, but I talk to young preachers and they drive me a little nuts because I'm like, okay, have you found a position yet? Have you found a church yet? I'm like, well, this church called me, but I don't really want to go there because, they're... Well, this church called me, but I laid out the law to them, and they were like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm like, are you going to go where Jesus has called you to go, or are you going to go the place that you want to be? Because of all people, the preacher should understand that God Himself arranges the church. He arranges the members of the body, each one of them as He chose. And for a preacher, it's really bad to say, I'm going to go where I want to go and not where God sends me. But it's also important for you to understand that God has arranged churches as He intended. And if He has brought you to this church, and this is your church, it's because you have a vital role in this church. And the plans that He has for our church, for the functioning of our body, include you and your participation. And when you choose to say, I'm going to withdraw from a church because I'm unhappy about something, or I'm going to choose a church because of what I like or don't like, that what you're doing is saying, I know better than Jesus about where I should be and what I should do. When you say, my role doesn't matter, so I'm not going to get engaged with what's going on, you're saying, I know better than Jesus. And the thing is, you don't. This is a beautiful idea. The idea that it's not the pastor and the leaders are important and everybody else is interchangeable, but the idea that Jesus loves you enough to have a plan for you, not just for your life, not just for salvation, but a plan for you to love and serve and grow and thrive within a church. And not just any church, but a specific church for you. I love this concept, and I also really don't like it very much. Because the number of times that I have to have conversations with people that say, you know what? Like this is going on and this is going on and we hate it, but we feel like God is leading us to do something else. You know what I have to do in those situations when somebody's talking to me about leaving our church? I have to encourage them, and I hate it. Because I have to say, you know what? God has a church for every person. And if God is leading you to go somewhere else, as much as I don't like it, you need to follow where God is leading you. Because if He has a church for you, that means that it's not always going to be this one. But if it is this one, then you have a place here. You have a function here. You have a role here. Because Jesus has led you here. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. Which part of your body gets all the face time? The face, right? That's why we call it face time. Because that's the part that gets all the exposure. And you could think, well, this is the most important part of me because this is the part that I use. And then I've got my hands. These are really important. I couldn't do anything without my hands. These are really important. But this other stuff, that small intestine thing, that's not all that important because it's not out there invisible. It's not where everybody can see it. That small intestine, what is it? I've never even seen it do anything. And yet, the small intestine is something that you cannot function without. We say, well, I'm not on stage, so I don't matter. Not on stage, so I'm not important. I'm not on stage, so I don't have this role. Do you know what happens to the face? The face gets sunburned. The face gets windburned. Sometimes the face gets punched because that's what's right there. Most of your wrinkles, right here. Somebody pointed mine out the other day. It was really nice. I enjoyed that. But God has placed the important things where no one can see them. Your large intestine, your small intestine, your liver, your lungs are inside and protected. Does that make them lesser because they're not on stage? They are vital. They are important. And you cannot function without them. On these parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow greater honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty. I don't really want to explain what Paul said here, but I'm going to, okay? You have pieces of yourself that you don't show to anybody except maybe one other person and your doctor. You have pieces of yourself that you don't show to anybody else, that you keep private. Does that mean that they are less important? No, actually, you show greater honor to them because you keep them covered. And if God has said your role to serve here is not going to be a face role, but it's going to be a role that's covered, that very few other people see, that doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean it's not vital. You don't get kids without those parts you keep covered. It's important and it's vital. And Paul said it first, so I have to say it. Those things that we keep covered that are not getting the face time are the things that are actually shown more honor. And what's the idea here? What's the idea here? The idea is that those face parts are getting all the glory now. I get all the attention now. I get seen now. My face goes on the website now and yours doesn't. But God will show you greater honor than He shows to me, because He has shown me honor now, and He will show you honor then, because you continued to serve even when no one else knew, even when no one else understood what you were doing, even when no one else understood that the appendix was vital to your gut health. You continued to serve. Has God placed me up here on the front, on the face parts? Has God placed our deacons on the face parts because they're more special or they're more important? Or is it because I need more time in the Bible than you do? And if it wasn't my full-time job, I wouldn't get what I needed to grow the way that I need to go. Whereas you can function on a lot less than I can. Is that the reason? It's possible. I don't know. But what I do know is that if Jesus has placed you here, it's the same as if He placed a piece on your body. And that piece is important. Whether you get FaceTime, whether anyone else knows what you're doing or not, if no one else understands what you're doing, you are still important to the work of this church. God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. He has done this for a purpose, so that our need for one another in serving in this church would cause us to what? To care for, to love one another. When we have a place, when we find our place, we develop love for one another. How do we become amateurs? How do we become people who love what we're doing and act as a motive of love? We find our people, those people that we love and that care for us, that can stir us up, that we go through things together with, and we find our place. Our place that says, I matter here. I may not matter as the FaceTime. I may not get the FaceTime. Everybody may not know what I'm doing here, but I am doing what God has led me to do here, and I matter in this church. And when you do that, when you find your place, you'll develop love for one another, because He has said, Jesus has done this. He has composed the body in this way so that there would be no division in the body. That we understand that there are stage roles and there are backstage roles. There are roles that get seen by everybody else and roles that don't get seen by everybody else. But all of the roles are vital. All of the roles are important. And because of that, we love each other, because we depend on each other. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. That when we find that unity, the unity that comes from not agreeing doctrinally, He doesn't say that doctrinal agreement is what brings us this love. He doesn't say that theological perfectitude is what brings us this love. What does He say brings us this love? And understanding that we have a place. That every one of us has a place and a role. Not because we make room for everybody, but because Jesus has designed this body to function with you in it. And when one of us suffers, all of us suffer. When one of us is honored, all of us rejoice together. So what do you do? What are you supposed to do with this? Find your place. I can't tell you what your place is. But what I can tell you is that Jesus has a place for you here, and He will show it to you if you will seek it out. You got to find your place. You got to show up. You got to be involved. You got to look for ways to pitch in and find your spot. Maybe that's a defined role like serving in the nursery. Maybe it's an undefined role. Maybe your purpose is, you say, there's not a whole lot I can do. I don't really like kids all that much. I can't work there. I'm not a great planner, but man, I can pray all day long. We have a prayer team that meets every Sunday morning that needs you on it. We have nursery workers that serve and love those kids every week. We have small group leaders that pour time and energy praying and planning. We have small group members that show up and that cook food and make everything every week. We have people that I don't even realize what it is that they're doing because their role is quiet and private, but they have found their role. You need to find your place. You want to make this an amateur year? Find your place. Because Jesus have for one. Understand that you matter in this church. You are of vital importance to this church. And we may not even understand why. We may have no idea why you're of vital importance. But Jesus has arranged the body with you in it. Which means that you matter here. And that's a double-edged sword here. First of all, it means that you can let go of that insecurity that says, I don't belong here, I'm not a part of here. You can let go of that because Jesus has decided that you do. But it also means that when you decide you don't matter, because a lot of us embrace the I don't matter thing as a way to get out of things. When you decide you don't matter and you choose not to do the thing that Jesus has placed you here to do, you hobble the rest of us. And you cause damage to yourself. Nate hurt his shoulder moving right about the time they moved here, just a little after they moved here. And instead of going to a doctor for it, maybe he went to a doctor for it, but I don't know what he did. He didn't move it. He left it alone. He didn't use it. Trying to make it better because he thought if I leave it alone, it'll get better. So he left it alone and he left it alone and he didn't use that shoulder and he babied that shoulder. And you know what happened to that shoulder? It froze up. Because he went so long not using it that it stopped working the way it was supposed to. Maybe you hurt your leg, so you hobble around on that leg. You don't put any weight on that leg because it hurts. And by not using it, the thing that you're trying to do to protect it actually causes it to get worse. The body part that's not used is the body part that suffers. And you're not just hurting us, but you're hurting yourself. But you are hurting us. I was tearing up the floor, Beckham's floor. It's supposed to be a floating floor where you just click it in and leave it there. But these people decided that if a tornado ever hit, the thing that they wanted to stay was this floor. So they glued every piece of that board down. And last weekend and this weekend, the past 2 days, all I've done the past 2 days is just getting that floor up. Using a hammer drill, a pry bar, and a hammer getting it up. And this hand stopped working last night. It's still, I don't know if you can tell, it's still pretty swollen. It's pretty far away. And I may not shake your hand today because it's hurting pretty bad. I use that hammer drill and I'm just pushing with that hammer drill. And it's hitting back at me and I'm pushing and I'm pushing and I'm pushing and I'm pushing. And then last night, I got done and I'm trying to eat soup. And this hand won't work. Like I can't squeeze the spoon the way I need to. I can't open things the way that I need to. And this hand doesn't work. So what does the rest of my body have to do? I have to compensate. My left hand is doing things my left hand doesn't know how to do. Like I don't know what this is for here. After all, after using it yesterday, I don't know what I'm doing with this hand. I'm trying to compensate because this hand is supposed to do a job, but it can't. And you know, sometimes you hurt something and it needs some time to rest and you have to compensate. And we'll work around you when you get hurt and you need some time. But the rest of the time, if you're just choosing not to be here, you're choosing not to find your place, we're like me last night, and even soup is difficult because you have chosen not to be a part of what's going on. You matter, and God has a purpose for you here and now in this church. God has a purpose for you. This is not just showing up, but you matter. And here's the most important thing of all this. You say, okay, the church can't do what it's supposed to do. What do I care? The church can't do what it's supposed to do. What does that matter? What does the church even do? You say, it doesn't matter to me that this isn't my place. It doesn't matter to me that I don't belong here. I just want to show up, get my gold star, and move on. Here's the thing. It's not just about we can't get our work done. It's not just about we can't do the things we want to do. But remember whose body we are. We're the body of Jesus himself on this earth. He has gone from this earth and has left us behind to do his work. So when we choose not to find our place, when we choose not to be involved, we choose not to engage where it is that he's called us to engage, we're not just holding up the work of solid rock. We're holding up the work that Jesus once done in this place. Let me ask you a question. What do you believe about Jesus? Do you believe that he is the only Son of God? Do you believe that you are a sinner that is destined for hell and eternal death without him? Do you believe that he gave up his life, that he lived 33 years on this place without running water, without good sanitation, without TV, that he lived on this place for 33 years and lived a perfect life that you could not live? And that he then offered himself up as a sacrifice for you. Do you believe that? He has said that anyone, not those who are good enough, not those who try hard enough, not even those who find their place, anyone who will believe that he's the only Son of God, that will recognize their need for rescue, and that will cry out to him, will be rescued. Do you believe that? If you believe that he has done all that for you, then who are you to say, no, I'm not going to find my place. No, I don't care if I matter. I'm not interested in this. No, I got too much going on. Maybe when I retire, I'll get more involved. No, who are you to say that? If you believe all those things to be true, and you see that he has ordered a church specifically to include you and that you are vital in the function of the work that he has called us to do here, how can you say no? And if you can say no, then I question whether you believe that or not. Because I don't know how I could say no to the one who rescued me at the cost of his own life. The one who has cared for me and provided for me. I don't know how I could say no. When he says, I want to rescue everyone else too. If you say, I don't care, you say, it doesn't matter, you say, I don't want to find my place, then ask yourself this. Do you really believe what you say you believe? Because I struggle to believe that anyone could believe what we say we believe and then deny Jesus when he says, I have work for you to do. Find your place. And if you will find your place, you're going to grow. You're going to turn into something different than you are right now. You're going to gain confidence as you step into what God has for you. But more than that, you will develop love for this people and this place. Because you cannot find belonging and not love the thing that you belong to. You want to make this an amateur year? Find your people. Find your place. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you and I thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us to gather together and worship, Lord. I'm so grateful that you don't just leave us to wander and say, you just pick a church. I don't care which church. Just pick a church. Just go to a church. It doesn't matter which church it is. Pick one that you like the colors, you like the preacher, you like the music. Pick one, and that's fine. You just need to show up and sit there. But instead, that you have ordered our body specifically and intentionally so that every person that you have to be a part of this church is a vital, functioning part, Lord. And if there are those of us that think we are more important because we have face rolls or because we've been here longer or because we know where the stuff is kept, humble us, Lord, that we might recognize that you didn't just place us here, but that you have placed all of us here. And if there are those in the room that say, you know what, I don't matter because I don't know where the cups are and I haven't been here that long and I am not important to this, Help them to understand that you have brought them to us at just the right time because of the work that you have for us to do. And we don't know what that role is going to be. We don't know if it's going to be a face, a tooth, or the small intestine, Lord, but we know that if you have ordained it, it matters. Help us to remember that we're not just here to do the works that we want to do or carry out the mission that we want to carry out, but the work of you on this place. And if there's any here today, Lord, that says, you know what, I don't believe this stuff. I have said that I believe this stuff, but I'm realizing that I haven't lived like I believe it. I don't know that I've ever actually submitted to you. That if they need to place their faith in you today, Lord, because they have not done it before, though they said they had, that they would recognize that your place for them today is to come to you for rescue and salvation. Help us, Lord, as we grow. As we bring in new people and as old people move out, Lord, help us to grow and to accept and to love because we are all vital parts of the body. It's in Jesus' name I pray, Lord. Amen. Would you stand with